So good morning, I'm Thomas Curran. Welcome to this session. It's about Intersource, and just as a background perhaps for you, I am a co-founder and co-CTO of Ori. Ori is a very popular open source project on GitHub. Please take a look at it. The topics are very much in the security realm: open authentication, Open ID Connect, AP security, and of course, we love your support. What I want to talk about today is actually how you build inside your enterprise or inside your company a community of developers that work on GitHub and collaborate on GitHub more or less like an open source project would work. So I have done some different projects in the past and had different roles in larger companies, and I'm going to use that experience to draw on and as I go through the next 10 slides and help you understand some of the opportunities you have to use GitHub in your company, and not only the tools and technologies, but also some of the methodologies. So for the managers out there, I mean, one thing that's often asked besides the price of any new software platform infrastructure is, why do you need this? And most companies today are using some kind of source code control, some kind of configuration management, some kind of deployment pipeline. All these things are absolutely typical. So the question of why GitHub is a very valid question. And I made a post last year. We had a similar talk at CeBIT. I'm very happy, by the way, that I was one of the last speakers in the last CeBIT ever. So that was good. One of the things GitHub does besides solve all these software issues is it lets you find things in your company. And this is not a very funny problem. Most organizations, especially they have email systems, they have databases, etc. But for source code, it's extremely difficult to find and maintain across an organization a lot of the intellectual property and just any property that software developers have done. Combined with the fact that most companies today don't do that themselves. I mean, they do a lot of stuff outsourced. And so bringing that into the company and being able to have one very easy thing, being able to search across the different products and projects and source code in order to understand risks, security issues, opportunities to reuse software, etc. These things are very important. Another thing that you obviously need and don't often have, especially if you're in a managerial role, is insight into who does what in the company. Now, again, this is no joke. I mean, if you're managing 1,000 or 2,000 or more developers, it's very important to know what people are doing, and sort of getting companies to real time is a big challenge. So being able to understand what people do and then spotting and developing and helping talent, much the way maintainers do in open source projects, is a very good opportunity. And of course, the last thing, today, you could argue software being a very imperfect world, and science to some extent, speed is very important, but also the ability to be resilient and change things and move fast is a goal for many operations that are software companies. And of course, many companies, banks, insurance, production of cars, etc. These companies in the past have not moved that fast. Some of the reasons are their customers don't want that, or they have many reasons. But in the end, and today especially, there's no reason for any company to be slow anymore, especially if you have GitHub supporting all of the DevOps infrastructure that we'll need, and we'll talk about that. So the first thing I would say, insight and learning from open source, is how do you build software products? Now, again, many organizations are structured around business lines, different sort of IT conventions. You have a database department, you have a security department, you might have Q&A, which is separate from those as well. And one of the things and the learnings I think we can draw on from the last 30 years of open source is that that doesn't really work. You need an integrated product team with the skill sets that are sufficient, first of all, to build the software. That's not only coding, that's also, we'll get into that, a lot of testing, QA, and of course, the operational part of it as well. And those product teams need to be managed as if it's really a multi-dimensional, what's the right word, sort of different skill sets put into one organization so that the team can operate. And again, this is not just about technology, this is more about how do you organize your teams to, how do you organize your developers to take advantage of the technology platform that GitHub brings to bear. Now you might have seen it today, this morning, etc. A lot of the even the new things that GitHub is doing is really focused on bringing the power to these teams and the operational capabilities that they have to deliver software. Another thing that's, again, just based on my observation and work with some large organizations is that often, even if they have a team that, or people that are good at things, they are often not organized in a way that lets them bring that capability to bear on any specific product, by the way, even if they're not working on that product themselves. So community of practice is a methodology and approach to building competencies inside an organization in a way that's orthogonal to any other hierarchical structure that you may have. Why is this important? Again, today we have a lot of new technologies that affect the way you build and deliver software. I'll just give you an example. Docker might be a good one, or cloud might be another one. And having people that like to go home and look at these things and do things when they come back to the office, why not organize them into communities, support those communities, give them some cookies or some coffee and a place to do stuff. It's not that hard, but I think the main thing is that especially on GitHub and especially the way you can build communities using GitHub, these practice communities help really drive a lot of the new inventions and the way you experiment with deployment systems. So please look into that. The next thing was, again, observation. Let's face it, a lot of so-called IT organizations or big enterprise production departments are really managing projects. Oftentimes you find that people are not that familiar due to other job responsibilities with the software stack that developers are using. GitHub gives you a very unique way of being able to interact with the technologies, with the software. You can set things up, it can be highly automated, we'll get into that. But the good news is GitHub is a platform that also makes learning by doing a very easy task to get into, especially for people that are not day-to-day involved in a project. And open source has really made itself, evolved almost like an animal, evolved to be, if you want people to do stuff for your project, it has to be easy to get into. You have to, for instance, in Ori, we have a 5-minute demo, and we really time it. So you can go there, you can look at everything, you have all the tools. We use Docker to deploy it. Similar things inside companies, even with all the security, firewalls, etc. You have new opportunities to do things. And learning by doing, I think, is a very big benefit of having, for instance, GitHub Enterprise deployed. The next thing you want to be very cautious about, I think, is collecting data. But you want to also be very ambitious about the amount of information you can you can collect over time because, one, you help teams by getting that information. Two, GitHub gives you a lot of things that you would not otherwise have as an actor in any kind of organization. So one of the nice things about GitHub repositories, as an example, is you can see the build health of any repository. You can also collect that data and make that publishable to other people that might be involved in the process. Now, a lot of companies do this on a very sort of siloed way. And I think the advantage of a tool like GitHub is you're able to really look at this data in a consolidated view across repositories. Now, when companies deploy GitHub in the beginning, it's very seldom, again, as I mentioned, you're not starting from scratch. You have Subversion, you have Bitbucket, you might have PVCS, some type of clear case, some type of environment that you would have been using prior to deploying GitHub. And all of those environments also come with their own sort of data set and the way they manage configurations. So creating something that's consolidated in GitHub will take a little bit of time and energy. And let me just explain some of the things that I've seen companies do. One thing that, again, when you're deploying new platforms, you have often the opportunity also to insert new processes and new ways of working. GitHub, as an example, keeps the whole idea of working in parallel that's manifested in GitHub is designed to let teams work very fast, but also keep sort of in sync with branches, etc. So pull requests become a very new and important dynamic for companies and especially teams in order to augment their day-to-day work without getting left behind. So how was it, before GitHub, it was you checked out some code, you did some stuff, you were a little bit nervous, it didn't build, so you didn't really want to check it back in, so you went for a week or maybe more of basically frozen code in a repository. And GitHub, and that of course for Linux was really disastrous, so that's why Git became a tool that let a lot of people work in parallel ways without needing to create what we would call long pull requests, long transactions. So instead, one of the, for instance, data points you might want to look at is the velocity of pull requests across all repositories. This gives you also a sense of other things that you might want to look at and try to help teams with. As an example, you find people that move from Subversion to GitHub in companies, they used many different deployment systems, and they might have 10, 20, 30 repositories because of that deployment infrastructure that they're using to operate their product. And one of the things that I think big companies that are mostly software companies, Facebook as an example, they really learned how to build mono repositories so you can consolidate all of that code base into one place and then basically datafy that whole repository and give the entire flavor of what's going on to people that are potentially affected. They could be SREs, they could be DevOps, they could be just programmers or managers, etc. But you want to be able to give the entire dynamic of a repository and an infrastructure to everyone affected by it. And so GitHub has the GitHub Enterprise, or GitHub the product, gives you some opportunities to collect and analyze data around that. Now, the other good thing about the GitHub system is that there are many other, obviously, open source products, but even any products that are hooked in to GitHub and give you additional information and data about what's going on in a product development. So as an example, if you're using coveralls for code coverage, or if you're using Cypress for integrated testing, you have quite a lot of data points that you can then bring back into some system. Things like Prometheus then give you a bigger infrastructure, Grafana for operating on that data. All those things are built using GitHub and have a very good interface with the rest of the GitHub APIs and services. That's really what you need to do in order to start automating things. So automation, of course, depends on data. If you want to, a lot of companies today have elaborate Gartner Group-based reports on RPA, robotic process automation, and all this stuff they want to do. And you look at it, and today, I mean, again, going into some companies, it just seems like, well, isn't that what you're doing? Isn't that software development? I mean, you're taking this process, you put some stuff into Excel, you fill out some forms, you put it on a website, and then you check it and see if everything's okay, and you need a scripting tool to do that. Well, the problem is, again, but automating processes, when they get disjunct from what else is going on in the business, it becomes by itself a future time bomb, because that becomes something that's hard to maintain, et cetera. So one thing about automating processes, and one thing's important about getting GitHub into your enterprise, is that you have to go all in. And believe me, I'm very radical about that. Everything goes in GitHub, or else you don't do it. The reason for that is then you have visibility, again, search, talent, et cetera, but you can also augment the data with new processes, new scripts, and look at all the stuff that's coming out, Console, Terraform, all of the deployment technologies. Imagine now applying them in your company and being able to automate many things that people do. Compliance. There are people in the financial industry, in banking, insurance, food production, et cetera, step by step by step by step. They have to check things, and it's not just seat of your pants. That's good. We all benefit from that. But you need an infrastructure that helps you implement the compliance over time, and GitHub can also do that. Why? GitHub creates audit trails. GitHub lets you go back and forth almost along a timeline. GitHub produces an interface to testing tools. GitHub also produces the interface to Jenkins or CircleCI or Travis. Having all of those things integrated gives you a much better data set about compliance than you would get by asking, two guys in the compliance department to take a look at this repository. So believe me, automation of compliance is a very big opportunity that companies have today when they deploy GitHub Enterprise. And by the way, we're not talking in this slide about deployment, but you want to basically automate almost everything possible. And think about open source projects. In order to really get people excited about any open source product, they need to be able to see it work. It needs to be really, the automation needs to be in place in order for the audience to have immediate feedback about their contributions. And I think companies more and more are coming to that point where even developers and other parties, again, integrated teams, product teams, people from marketing also want to see stuff work. And I think that's important for integrating and working with the GitHub Enterprise infrastructure, but also just getting the community of people that you need involved in more and more products. A lot of companies talk about this today. They want to interface with customers, they want to understand customers, but really, isn't that part of a bigger issue, which is they don't really understand the products they produce? And they can't because they don't have the visibility, they don't have the contact, they don't know where to go to ask people. Even a website, a lot of times today, even in modern companies, it's very seldom that you can just call up someone and say, how does this work? I'm on a chat system, I have a call from a customer. So bringing the community aspect of GitHub, again, I don't know, I saw 36 million today, if that's right or wrong, let's say it is, right? So lots of people are in a community across the globe that are working on one infrastructure. Think of getting everyone in your development in GitHub on an enterprise. So first of all, this sounds strange, but it's not strange if you're in a company. You know, you can communicate with someone that you didn't know that works in another department. You don't need to send an email to his boss and ask him if it's okay to talk to him. You can do everything in one GitHub community, and I think that's super important. The other thing is, again, when you're automating and when you're using DevOps, many tools, you have the whole repository buildup and tool integration that you can do in one place, which makes it much easier for companies to see what they're doing across the board, but it also makes it easier for maintainers inside your company to get the automation effects that they would otherwise be expected to have from implementing a system like GitHub Enterprise. Again, tool chain, look, we're in a probably, I guess, one of the best eras I can imagine in software. I've been doing this for 30 years or so. There's so many new tools, there's so many people building stuff, individuals, open source teams, small software companies. Every day, more or less, you get something new that comes out that you want to look at and try out with your software. The GitHub community, the public GitHub community, I think is very ambitious about embracing things and testing things. And by the way, if it's not good, you get your teeth kicked in. You know, that's it. Peer review is extremely important, and it should be happening inside your company as well. You should be able to, without having a lot of questions asked, have an infrastructure where you can make a contribution as a software developer. You're honestly one of the most important pieces of employment that the company probably has today. And getting you and keeping you and making you happy is extremely important for every business, because software really is eating up the world. So having this capability to get new things in, new inventions, be able to try them, put them in a GitHub tool chain or in a DevOps tool chain, and having that capability to interact with the system gives you a whole new way of working. And I think we'll see in this era of software that that's really a good thing for business. And by the way, you have a proving ground of now 36 million people that have tested this and see that it's actually okay. To get the big benefits, though, the big bang out of a lot of these things, you need to be able to get to real time from a business standpoint. What does that mean? That means you need to be able to implement communication infrastructures that don't work on email. Because email kills almost any good idea. It's bad for software development. It's bad for software developers. It's also cumbersome. It tends to reinforce unnecessary hierarchies in business. And you know, most of the time, it's just a pain in the ass to read. So you have all this email and you want to do your code, and instead you have stuff to do that's disjunct, that's out of sync, that was yesterday's problem, and that's called email. In order to get your developers, and this is a very important part of integrating with GitHub, is to get the information that GitHub produces into your company in some way. A lot of people probably use Slack. You know, I've used and implemented Slack in numerous companies. It tends to be it tends to be a very big moment of truth for businesses, because they thought they knew what they were doing, and then they implement a system like Slack. People start building communities because they're allowed to do that. They get information that they otherwise wouldn't have had, and they can do it all very quickly, and they can operate on that information in a way that's also archived and synchronized. So first of all, you can do every automation from GitHub in Slack. So every time you do a pull request, every time you do a release, all that information can be provided via robots into Slack. If you're dealing with customers, Slack also helps you do that. Slack is not part of the GitHub Enterprise platform, just to make that clear. It's part of another platform that's revolutionizing the way companies and employees in companies communicate. One thing that Slack does do, though, is it gives you also branches to and capabilities or channels to work with companies that you would partner with as a business or customers. At Ori, we use Discord to communicate with our developer community. Discord, for those that haven't heard about it, is popular in the gaming community. It's extremely targeted, I would say, to that type of community. But for us, and working with software developers around the globe that are in Ori, we find it a very good way to get immediate feedback, real-time information about what's going on with the software we build and the customers and the community of contributors that we want to connect with. Those are just two examples. There are other things out there that that are able to facilitate and help. But I think a very important thing when you decide to go with a platform like this, be realistic about the real-time opportunities that companies like GitHub platform will provide your business, and then you have to really exercise on doing that. So it's a change on many different levels. And by the way, it's just like websites and blogs. Managers also go on Slack and they have channels and people can read the stuff that they talk about, but they can also get some advantages by seeing what developers are doing, what's deployed, what customers are saying, etc. Again, that gives the whole company a way of getting feedback and, in some sense, a way of interacting with customers. Now, I've been around quite a long time in the software area, and I don't think really you can do and build great software by just asking customers what they want. I don't think that's really a great approach, because software by itself is art. It's not science. It's something that you need to think about, imagine, and create. But feedback helps, especially if something's broken, and especially if you want to get information about new features that you thought of. And creating a scenario and a system, by the way, using GitHub, maybe even using a public GitHub repository outside of your enterprise, gives you a capability and gives customers a capability of working together. I'll just give you an example. A year ago, I was helping a big organization with their data infrastructure and helping them build a public data set. Okay, and to build a public data set is not trivial, but of course, in this case, it was built with one of the, let's just call it, bigger cloud infrastructures. Now, in order to work with that cloud company, we needed to have a way of giving them the capability of cooperating and developing and testing all the source code and some of the data that was provided. And every day, the teams could get feedback from each other, what was working. They would try stuff. They're located in Seattle, doesn't matter. They could try stuff in their office. We could do stuff here in Germany. And having that interaction and that sort of way of working was extremely effective. And GitHub was the base for that. And I can say, honestly, there wasn't even a discussion. We had one phone call, we set up the project, we got everyone on GitHub. Everyone already had their GitHub users. The company isn't Microsoft, by the way. So, this is, again, how developers work and how you get interaction and feedback for new software and new inventions today depends a lot on your ability to structure things and work with things and get your company involved in that. Now, we talked about compliance, we talked about security, but let's also just talk about mindset. You know, the single biggest challenge that every company has is not technology, it's not policies, it's the way you think about things. And letting employees work in a way that where they can collaborate with Google or Microsoft or GitHub and do stuff and exchange information is very, very difficult for Joe manager to understand. Why is that work? How is that going? I might lose my job if somebody, you know, provides the wrong information. That mindset is not going to change because you implement GitHub Enterprise or any other technology, but that mindset will change because you've changed the way you work, and the potential to work in new ways is a highly effective way of shifting the thought process in companies. So that's a benefit that you would get from implementing this whole infrastructure. So when I say that, that's because, you know, the silos in companies are built around politics, power, money, not technology, not software, not developers. So some of these structures that you want to break down, you also need structures to break down the old structures. And one of the things I think I would encourage, along with the implementation and rollout of Intersource in general, is to really have a dedicated product development lab. Now, everyone here knows you can do that virtually. You don't need to go ask Joe manager for budget or get some permission from someone. You can set up a lab as part of an organization inside GitHub, and then get people to come and collaborate on new things. Let me give you some examples. New programming languages. You want to set up a Go infrastructure with JavaScript and have some simple apps deployed. Oh, by the way, my manager wants to see how you program an app on the iPhone or program an app on any phone. Just simple things where you can then get people, come, show, push this button, look at this code, make a change, do a pull request, try this out. It's not going to break anything. No customer is going to see this. But getting people in this lab and teaching them how to do things is a critical part, again, because of the mindset, because of the fact that, you know, we don't have the luxury in business of going back to school every day. I think that's a shame. I think people should be learning much more, but again, using this infrastructure to set up a lab and give people the permissions is important. When you implement GitHub Enterprise, there are many different ways to do it. I'm speaking here from my own perspective and experience. Make one organization. Don't try to make the organization that was there today or was there yesterday, don't try to implement that organization in GitHub, because you'll fail. You'll fail because the benefit of Intersource and getting to Intersource as a sort of business philosophy requires you to open up the whole kimono. Now, you might have some secret sauce if you're Coca-Cola or whatever company, and you can protect different repositories. But the benefit of implementing new types of software production platforms is that you get maximum involvement from everyone in the company. Even people that don't do software should be on GitHub. And the reason for that is they can do other things. They can write documentation, they can write customer stories, they can add things, including issues, they can look at how the software is working. Don't look at GitHub Enterprise and Intersource in general as an experiment that you use to reduce cost. Big mistake. Look at this as a way of all-inclusive changing the philosophy about how people view and look at your software today. You know, again, just one example. A lot of times companies can't maintain the software they have. The reason for that is they have people that worked on that software that are no longer alive or no longer in the company. So giving those repositories an option to have other people look at it, and you know, I'm happy to admit, I developed stuff on the mainframe. You know, I can look at that today and still make some assessment of whether it can be changed or not. A lot of companies have opportunities to open up what they've done in the past to their current employee base and gain information from that. So thank you very much. I hope that that was helpful for you, and I look forward to being around and talking to you about any of the topics here, or of course my favorite topic of today, Ori, and I have even brought the whole company with me in case you have some security and API challenges that you want to discuss as well. Thank you very much.